It says live.
Streaming live on YouTube.
Okay, so we're good to go, that means.
All right. Great. So our first witness, this is Senate Judiciary Committee, April 15th, 2020, reading remotely from our living rooms, bedrooms, spare rooms, attic, cellars, office, wherever. You know, I've been watching Seth Meyers in that A Closer Look, and he's meeting in his attic. And quite interesting. Anyway, so we're starting, and our first witness is Commissioner Mike Sherling from the Department of Public Safety, who is, I guess, in charge of a lot of stuff. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Maybe a couple things, but there are, as you're well aware, thousands of people working over the last, I don't even know how many weeks on the COVID-19 response statewide. A short time ago, I sent a few updates to the committee on general operations from the Emergency Operations Center, the Vermont State Police, and the Division of Fire Safety. They just give a quick outline of some of the activities that have been undertaken in the last few weeks. I guess the 80,000 foot view would be that over this period of weeks, together with the entire state government enterprise and a variety of partners outside of state government, from nonprofits to businesses, individuals, we've taken the whole of emergency response and what we typically do with a normal, quote unquote, disaster like a flood or a hurricane or something like that. And in many instances had to take those plans and completely reimagine them to be able to provide the necessary resources across the state to respond to COVID-19. So the number of things that have occurred are so voluminous it'd be difficult to A, remember them right now because they haven't all been cataloged, and B, describe them. So I thought what I would just do is give you a point in time snapshot of the types of things that are underway right now. On the top of the list is continuing to build out the data systems and the dashboards that inform decision making. So that's been ongoing for since the beginning of this. And I wish I could share my screen and be able to show you those, but I tried that a minute ago and the bandwidth just isn't enough to be able to refresh those live views as we go. But
they're on the website. They're on the committee page if you guys want to look at them.
Oh, really? Huh?
The dashboard views of various things, they may be different items that we're talking about. The
documents that you sent me this morning, the four documents.
This is different. These are
okay. I apologize. Sorry.
No problem. These are live views of assets. So I'm going to describe what the dashboard looks like. The very first screen you come to is a map of Vermont and the ability to look at assets by geography, whether those are hospitals, other medical facilities, surge sites that have been built. And we can actually overlay volunteers that have stepped up to participate in this as well. So if we get to a point where we need to deploy volunteers to a particular site, or we need to match assets by geography, there's a geo-referenced map that can assist with that. The next layers are the health department's dashboards, which are public facing. So if you go to the health department's website, you can see the COVID-19 snapshots that are available to all Vermonters on a day-to-day basis. And those have been built out really rapidly with quite a bit of information. And then over the course of the last couple of weeks, you've seen static snapshots of personal protective equipment, ventilators, bed status, things like that. Those continue to be built out as we look at supporting a larger cross-section of our partners with personal protective equipment and other gear. And we're essentially building systems that have never been imagined before. The supply line system for what's called the SNS warehouse, which is run by the health department in conjunction with the Emergency Operations Center, and today in conjunction with the Army National Guard, is designed to supply Vermont's 16 hospitals. What we're doing on an ad hoc basis right now, and soon to have a fully built out system, is supporting nursing homes, long-term care facilities, elder care facilities, first responders, home health workers, and a variety of other frontline populations that need ongoing access to personal protective equipment as we continue to evolve the response to COVID-19. So we're able to see right now on the fly what the PPE levels at hospitals, long-term care, and nursing facilities look like. And we then overlay those models against what we know the existing burn rates are, how many units are being used at any given time. And we can also overlay with a variety of different models around the COVID-19 pandemic itself, and you've seen some of those forward facing at various press conferences, what the expectation of the virus spread looked like in a worst case unmitigated scenario, what it looked like with mitigation, and what it looks like now with Vermonters really doing a great job at heeding the advice and warnings, and really suppressing the outbreak to a more manageable level than it would have been otherwise. So we're able to look at that on an ongoing basis, and the teams that do all that work use that as as the backdrop for ensuring that we're getting things out on a day-to-day basis. So there's a data component to all of this in the decision making. There's a modeling component. There is a frontline effort at PPE, which is top of mind right now. And then embedded in those reports I gave you are a host of other activities that are coordinated by the Emergency Operations Center, and then some sub-activities by the State Police and Division of Fire Safety. And without going into all the details and reading you documents, I'll leave it there with just the note that it's been an interesting evolution of how this has all come together. The Health Department and the Agency of Human Services are really on the front line of what is obviously a health emergency. So the manner in which the work has evolved has looked a little different than in the prior emergencies that you've seen go by. So in addition to what you see on those documents, there is another iceberg of work that's going on in a variety of other areas around state government, so that those do not represent a comprehensive view of everything that's happening. And with that, I'll respond to things that are of interest to you rather than droning on for 15 minutes.
Actually, what you were just talking about is extremely interesting to me. I'm sure the rest of the committee. I had a meeting on Thursday remotely with the local hospital, the Southwest Vermont Medical Center. They basically said they had 5 days supply of personal protective equipment available, which would bring us to Tuesday that they would run out. Are we prepared in that area? And I also heard from folks at other, particularly at nursing homes, where obviously the deaths rates have been high. I think 42% in Massachusetts of the deaths are people that were in long-term care facilities. So I'm curious about the supply of our personal protective equipment.
I'm knocking on wood. The supply lines, based on current burn rates statewide, particularly in hospitals, nursing facilities, and long-term care facilities, which are the primary areas that have been supplied to date, are holding pretty well. Actually, the numbers are increasing. Supply on hand is increasing. For both the committee's consumption and for anyone listening online, there are 2 ways people can request personal protective equipment from the state stockpile. One, there's a web form that goes directly to the SNS warehouse. And the other is if you're in an emergency scenario, you open a box and it's empty and you thought there were 1,000 masks in it, you can call the Emergency Operations Center and we can accelerate a delivery from the SNS warehouse. as an example, I'm looking at the dashboard right now. I looked up that hospital. They're showing on hand 11,000 N95 respirators, 4,000 surgical masks, 3,500 body protection units, and 760 face shields. So the burn rates that show graphically. So I can only tell you that based on current modeling and the existing supply lines, they appear to be in good shape as long as the supply lines hold.
The other issue is the mitigation effort, the stay-at-home order. I sent a copy of an email from somebody in the Deerfield Valley in Wilmington, actually, who reported a large number of out-of-state cars and at both Molly Stark State Park and throughout the Deerfield Valley over the weekend. And I heard the governor's press conference, I think it was Monday, and he talked about lowering the number of checkpoints with our AOT. And we talked about that last week with Colonel Birmingham. But I wonder if there's a way to patrol those areas of the state where they're seeing people are reporting a high number of out-of-state cars at various venues, which are not motels or anything like that.
We could certainly keep an eye on that, Senator. As you're aware, I forgot the number of monitoring points that were set up by
38,
VTrans.
I think. 38.
So we've got some data on what the inflow and outflow of vehicles looks like. As you might imagine, it's primarily New Hampshire and New York, which there's active workforce that is supporting the COVID-19 effort there. So it didn't give a tremendous amount of concern. On the sort of the global picture of out-of-state plates in Vermont, I know what we've taken into account in our modeling for both disease spread and availability of resources is some cross-section of tens of thousands of sort of secondary Vermonters who have homes here or are staying with relatives because they're at-risk population or something of that nature. So the fact that we're seeing out-of-state cars particularly at outdoor recreation kinds of areas is not surprising, given that we've expected, I want to say 30 to 40,000 folks that are not primarily Vermonters, but sort of secondary Vermonters to be in the mix for our planning, and the encouragement that's been given over the last few weeks for folks to be active and get outside, socially distanced while you do so, but to stay healthy in that manner. So those observations are not surprising, and absent some other fragment of information, I don't think would give us concern that that there are activities happening that are problematic.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Senator White and then Senator Bruce. Yes.
If I could just tell you, your monitor behind you is broadcasting commercials or something.
Oh, thank
and
you.
it's a little distracting. You might want to.
It's called product placement.
Yeah.
It was ESPN.
Okay, great.
You're watching the Masters from 2012?
Yeah, who knows what I'm watching? I mean, the events are so old, I forgot the results.
So,
Senator White. Thank you, Senator Baruth. I forgot it was on.
thank you. Thanks, Commissioner. I just have two issues, and one is a question and one is a question suggestion. So I don't know if all the EMS providers have adequate PPEs. We had heard that they did not, that they only had a few days worth of them, and particularly some of the smaller ones. So I'd like to make sure they get their supplies, and then I'll ask the other comment. I don't know if you have if you're part of the team that decides what are essential workers or not. And we are hearing a lot about farmers markets, but I would like to bring up a different issue that has nothing to do with this committee necessarily, but you're here and you're a captive audience, so I'm going to bring it up. Landscapers, most landscapers work alone or with one or two people, and usually pretty far apart. And what we've heard from, well, I'll give you one example here of why we need to have them be allowed to work, is we have a condo community down here that is right near the woods. And if they don't keep their grass mowed down, they are subject to lots of ticks. They've already seen them there, and their landscaper says he can't come because he's not considered an essential worker. So I would like to put in a plug for allowing landscapers to be essential workers, particularly at this time of the year until fall. And as long as they keep the social distancing and don't have contact with their clients, physical contact.
Great. I'll take the PPE part first. Last week, we engaged with all first responders, nursing facilities, long-term care facilities, and home health organizations to do really two things. One, ensure that they have current and second, to ensure that will work on team robust guide. Warehouse and logistics team is building out a larger staff to be able to accommodate faster deliveries to a larger cross section of organizations at the same time. We've also had, in addition to just sending out guidance via email and having the digital realm being the main way to communicate, we've had teams of folks that have had direct phone calls with essential facilities and first responders to ensure that they've got that information beyond just getting an email and having it buried in thousands of messages. There's a lot of work going on there. It is not a perfect system yet, where we've pivoted to supporting a larger array of folks, and we're building out the system to be able to do that efficiently right now. No major flaws. It's just it's building up a new way of distribution. On the essential worker and landscaper piece, you'll be hearing more about what's next in terms of what folks have referred to as restart, or the next phases of getting Vermont back to some semblance of normal in the coming days. And there are teams from Commerce, Health, and DPS, Emergency Operations Center, that are working together on those plans to help the governor inform his decision making over the next few days. And folks working outside are at the top of that list, as you might imagine.
Is
Thank
there
you.
a specific place where we can send suggestions? Because I think that from what I've heard, we have a real outcry about farmers markets, and I understand that, but I'm hearing from landscapers around here, but I haven't heard that as being a big public outcry. So I'd like to make sure that the team understands that from the perspective down here anyway, that's really important. So is there a place, or will you convey the message?
I will convey that message because I'll be involved in those conversations today and tomorrow. In terms of other feedback, I would just, folks are welcome to give feedback through the Agency of Commerce, but there's an enormous amount of activity and requests going in. By and large, people should rest assured that there is a wide array of things being considered to try to balance the public health, ensuring we don't have additional outbreaks, but with the need to ensure that people have clear guidance on how they can get back to work on a timeline that we're working on right now.
Thank you.
Joe, Senator Benning had a question, Mike.
Good morning, Commissioner. In that series of considerations, I was driving in this morning thinking my wife, who is a second grade school teacher, has had to go through the motions of taking her classroom and putting it in our dining room. As the spigot gets turned slowly, but I'm going to ask you this as a personal favor and as a hope that this is a universal situation. Teachers getting back into their classrooms. I'm not talking about students, I'm talking about the teachers, where all of their resources are, would enable them to be able to teach their kids through Zoom or whatever in the environment where all of their resources are. And isolated in individual classrooms, I can't see them being a threat to each other. In fact, she's also on a school bus every morning where they're doing tests before they get on the bus to go make deliveries to folks for the food drops. But getting them back into the place where they can better teach from would be a sign, at least to them, that they are getting some relief in how they're trying to perform their jobs right now, as well as I would suggest that students themselves being able to see their classroom would give them some kind of a hope that there's a light at the end of this tunnel. So my normal contact person for this is Kendall. I know Kendall has been very good about responding to requests, and I really do appreciate all of you who are responding. And I know the work you're under. The common denominator that we all have is we've never faced this before. But I'm hoping that you will take that suggestion with an eye toward figuring out how to assemble a path toward normalcy. And that's one step right now that would, in my eyes, be a safe one to take and actually bring some relief to several quarters.
As soon as I'm off with you, Senator, I will get that into the mix for near-term consideration.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions for Commissioner Sherling or Colonel Birmingham?
I just wanted to have a question or just a statement for Commissioner Sherling. And that is, I appreciate you speaking to the issue of suicide this morning that I heard. I do have a constituent who I think is getting very depressed with regard to his not being able to get through to, he has only a flip phone and no computer, and all the computer sites that you can park outside in your car or walk there and sit are closed. For instance, the library and the resource center where he goes. And he's been on this mission to get his regular unemployment, and he does require a call to him, but he hasn't gotten it. And he's been calling in every day, all day long. And of course, he's getting no place. So there may be other people like this. This guy lives alone, and he's getting desperate at this point. I'm sure he'll get some money at some point, but in the meantime, he's like really depressed. So anyway, just a thought about those people out there who are kind of hidden.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know the Department of Labor is working 24/7 to try to find paths for folks to get through. I have friends and family members who are not able to get through as well. So I'll mention to Commissioner Harrington this idea that, or the notion that we've got some folks that don't have any technology at all. Although I do know Labor has tried to get folks to use the phone, actually, because it's a more reliable method of communicating and getting the data in. But we'll pass that on as well. And on the suicide mental health, in that realm, the Department of Mental Health has done an amazing amount of work in the last week with a variety of partners. And I know that there's some campaigns that'll be unveiled in the next few days or couple of weeks on that. We are tracking rates of suicide, and knock on wood, actually, they've been down overall over the last couple of months. What I mentioned a couple of weeks ago at a press conference, it turned out to be an odd confluence of events where sort of a month's average of those unfortunate tragedies happened over a weekend. So it looked like there was a blip instead of a flat trend. So we're continuing to monitor that, and we are mindful of just innumerable stresses that people are under the circumstances, and trying to
Yeah.
provide as much relief as possible.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes, just for the committee's edification, at yesterday's joint fiscal committee meeting, there was a very heavy discussion about the unemployment situation and the inability to get through, and the need we urged the administration, and are sending a letter shortly to the administration, urging them to put all available resources and whatever else is necessary to get this problem fixed. There's no question that just increases to the stress and the aggravation for folks. And not only, the suicide issue, but it also, when you're stressed, your immune system is not as strong as it ought to be, which can make you more susceptible for the COVID-19 virus. And so there's a lot of reasons to try to, it's a stressful time, obviously, but there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to impact that stress. And so I hope that, the administration heard the Joint Fiscal Committee, and I think others. I think Senator Ash put it well yesterday. So Senator White's the last question for Commissioner
So
Shirley.
this isn't just a question necessarily, but for Senator Nitka's, the person she was talking about, for somebody who very recently used a flip phone as a track phone that had limited number of minutes. If you're sitting on hold for hours, you're eating up those minutes really fast. So there needs to be a way to somehow allow people to leave a message and get a call back instead of sitting, waiting, and eating up their minutes. People who have regular cell phones, smartphones, whatever, don't face that problem. But anybody who has a track phone is eating up all those minutes sitting.
I think the Government Operations Committee should get on that as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
I will pass along that piece of detail as well, as we continue to look at ways to build out the systems to try to accommodate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Sherling. And Colonel, if you want to stay on, fine, if you have anything to add.
I do not at this time, but
you're
thank
doing.
you for,
Thank you.
sorry, Commissioner. I do not,
Okay.
but thank you for having us.
Thanks
Thank
you. Now I have Commissioner Baker with an update from Pat last week. Obviously, there's been a lot of developments at Northwest, so we thought we'd hear from you. I think one of the other questions that's been asked, and we continue to hear from various groups about the release of offenders who are over 60 who may be vulnerable, and how that's going. And obviously, I heard Mike Smith say something about the number of people who are left in that age group are certainly very violent. Many of them are very violent criminals.
Yeah, good morning, Senators.
Good morning.
Trust you're all staying healthy, and thanks for having me back. I think maybe, Senator, where I'll start is just to kind of update you on the population. As about 9:30 this morning, we were at 1406 total population between Mississippi here in Vermont. That's up 5 from yesterday. I know there were a couple lodgings, and along the lines of lodgings, just for pandemic protocol purposes, any new lodging we bring in, we separate them from the population and put them into quarantine for 14 days. So if somebody's coming from the outside and they come in, they go into quarantine, they don't go into the general population. It's another mitigation measure that we're taking. I'll get to the question, Senator, in a minute, but I thought what I would do is just give you some numbers right now. We've had 35 inmates test positive. We still have 33 of them in our custody. One of them remains at Northwest in an isolation unit there, a medically isolated unit. 32 of those are at the surge site in St. Johnsbury. And I'll certainly answer questions about the South St. Johnsbury in a few minutes. 2 of those inmates were released because they were ready to be released. And we worked with outside medical care and they were placed in some of the sites around the state where COVID positive folks were released. Neither one of them were systematic. They're asymptomatic. So they've been released off to medical care out there and being monitored on the outside. Most of the inmates, with the exception of a couple, are asymptomatic. We do have a couple that are running fevers, and we're monitoring that situation as we speak. We have 18 staff members that have been tested positive. Most of the staff members, except for one, are recovering at home or at a relative's house. I will tell you that between Sunday and yesterday and today, I've spoken to all 18 except for the one that's hospitalized. I did talk to his fiance, and I'll give you an update on him in a minute. Most of the staff are not exhibiting serious symptoms, but a couple have respiratory congestion and fluctuating temperatures, much like what you hear from reports of people who have gone through the COVID-19 virus. Our one staff member that I briefed you last week is still in an ICU unit, is doing remarkably well considering where we were 2 weeks ago when we first got the report. And he continues to improve. And where he is located, the medical facility he's located at is a top-notch facility and providing him great care. We are now preparing for the next conversation, and I'm hoping by the end of tomorrow. I certainly hope we don't get there. But the next conversation for us is if we get another surge, what are we going to do? We have made the decision that we're making space in the other facilities for a handful of people that we can handle up to a certain level if they test positive. But we're working on trying to isolate those areas in those facilities like we have isolated in St. Johnsbury. There's an article in the Caledonia Record this morning in working with the town of St. Johnsbury. Clearly there was some miscommunication there, and I'm certainly, Senator Benning's been part of this conversation, and I'm willing to clarify anything that the senators need clarified on this. But part of our conversation with the town of St. Johnsbury is we asked their fire chief, their emergency director, who has a great deal of experience on the national level. He's part of the national USAR team. He actually participated in helping with, I believe the term would be, the evacuation of the cruise ship that was off the coast of San Francisco. He has a great deal of knowledge about safety around containing the virus. We asked him to inspect our facility yesterday, and I'm not speaking for him, but the feedback we got, and it's well documented in the paper today, is that the work that we did to create cold, warm, and hot zones, and the way we petitioned off where the infected inmates are, is probably as good as he's seen anywhere. And that was all done based on CDC guidance, along with guidance from Dr. Levine and his staff at the health department. So that's the St. Johnsbury site. A couple other updates. As you can appreciate, we're getting a lot of requests from family members of inmates in our custody. Even situations with some family members who we have people we supervise in the community. The fear factor for everybody is high. It's high for me, it's high for all of you. This is something we've never faced before. The unknown is the worst part of this. And so we've created a website that we launched yesterday. And the best way for me, my limited technical terms, is it's almost like if you had a problem with your Apple product and you went online to Apple and you put a request in that you're having a problem, you describe the problem, and within a few minutes, a staff member calls you back and helps you work through your problem. We've created an on-site line like that. A press release will be going out today. What I'm hoping is that we can get back to family members much quicker than we do now, because the requests for information come in from many, many places inside our system, and we're losing track of them. The beauty of this system is it automatically creates a spreadsheet, and we can track if someone got back to a family member or not. Sometimes what we have to say. Family members don't want to hear, but it's important to me that family members hear from us quickly about what their concerns are about their loved one that's in our custody. So that's something we stood up today. Going back to the Northwest facility, we engaged the health department's epi team, the epidemiologist team, came in and did tracing. And based upon that, they gave us some more advice on how to further isolate that facility to prevent any more cases of the virus breaking out in the facility. They were able to help us better identify where we think inside the jail that it started. So we've been able to better isolate off and try to contain the best we can. A lot of that work came from the work that they did at the nursing homes. So that's another piece that we put in place. I talked about the family webpage. And the last thing I'll say about St. Johnsbury is we've also had medical folks come in and give us advice on the medical care we're giving there. I know there's a lot of rumors out there. There's rumors floating around amongst the inmate population and families that the healthcare there is not good. And I would push back against that and tell you that every person we've had validate what we're doing there is we've got the best medical care we can on the ground at that facility. And so that's pretty much an update of where we are. I'm certainly open to questions, comments, and feedback.
To ask you a question. That one question would be, is Centurion providing the healthcare, or have you got somebody else in there, or are you doing it with?
No, it's Centurion, Senator.
Okay, so it's just part of the overall
Part of
healthcare that they're
part of the
providing.
overall contract. They've been very cooperative in moving staff around, so we have enough staff at St. Johnsbury.
Thank
We
you.
staff St. Johnsbury 16 hours a day with staff in the building, and then on 8 hours overnight, they're on call. And we've set up pretty much a telemedicine situation. If staff sees that an inmate is starting to, we're checking temperatures. If their temperature is starting to go up, we immediately contact the staff, the medical staff.
I also wanted to mention, I know Senator Benning may comment later, but he's been under tremendous pressure representing St. Johnsbury and has done a terrific job, in my opinion, of trying to represent them, but at the same time, recognizing that the state has a problem that needs to be dealt with. And
Correct.
So I do want to recognize Senator Benning and his effort there to kind of try to deal with his constituents. And all of us know at one point or another, constituents get upset about something that the state is doing and not doing.
And the senator's been of great guidance to us. Al Cormier has been talking to the senator on a regular basis, and he's been of great guidance to us to better understand the mood in the community.
Senator White had a question.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. The new site that you've set up for questions to go
Yes.
through, is that noted on the DOC
Yes.
website, so that, because I've had a number of calls from family members who would like to check in and see. So can they go there?
It's up there now, Senator. There's a set form there. And again, please do not test my knowledge about technology.
No, but if they go to your
It's a
website,
it's a drop-down form, and it goes, you fill out the form, you send it, it populates our database. And I've actually brought, although it's not official yet, I'm hoping to get him on the payroll here soon. But I brought Keith Talon back, who is a retired district manager. I
Yep.
know Senator Sears knows Keith very well.
Yeah.
Keith is spearheading this. We brought him back on a part-time basis, and we've got some folks inside working on it. And we're also bringing an inmate advocate involved in it as well. I know some of you recognize Tim Burgess's name as an advocate, and
Yep.
Tim is working with us on this as well. And Tim is going to help us answer some of the questions, because I think it's sometimes Tim understanding the system and what families are going through can better translate for us what the frustration of the families are.
So I just went to the official DOC website, and it says 2019 novel coronavirus, but there's no place there that says,
Is it, do you see family and friends off to the left-hand side?
oh,
Can we do
Yeah,
a
but-
tutorial at another time?
okay. I just want to know where to send people.
Senator, I will have the staff get to you because you don't want me giving you a tutorial. I
Okay,
will have someone from the staff get to you.
thanks. I
okay.
just want to make sure that it's
Yeah.
obvious for
A
people.
press release will be going out this afternoon and we'll be tweeting the information out as well of where
Okay,
people can go and find it.
Yep, thanks.
Any other questions for Commissioner Baker? Senator Benning.
Well, Commissioner, this isn't really a question. I don't know if you were on earlier with Commissioner Sherling when I said the one common denominator that we all have is that we've never faced this magnitude of a problem or the speed with which it has come down upon us. And I want to say a couple of things because this is a public setting and you need to hear it from me in that environment. There have been a series of steps that were taken, and this is not to point blame or to try to point fingers, but those series of steps and frankly miscommunications fall upon all of us. And the situation moving forward sort of tells me that at some point down the road, we need to have a universal conversation that does a post-op on what went down here, because I am very convinced there's going to be a second wave of this somewhere down the road, and we need to have that conversation in order to be better prepared. I will say I have read the Caledonian Record this morning. I do know that the fire chief has given approval. There appears to be, the town is now satisfied that the situation that we have is what it is, and in dealing with what we've got now, there is the best effort being put forward. I'll caveat that to say I'm also hearing from a third element, and that is I have one of those 25 inmates that were left behind, and of course that family is screaming in my ear, and I've got 8 messages from them I haven't been able to get to this morning. So I'm hearing information on that front as well. The one thing that is still a question in my mind, and I haven't gotten an answer from anybody, but in designing St. Johnsbury as a surge facility, it was and is my understanding that it was labeled a secondary isolation unit, and St. Albans and Field were both labeled primary units. This is something, I guess, to chew on for future discussion purposes. But it seems to me to make sense that if you have an influx at one location and you do a series of tests of the inmates involved, if you've got a group of inmates who are not infected, placing them at a surge facility would have made more sense because you're containing the problem that you already have in the one location that you know it exists. And it's just something to chew on for future purposes, that perhaps a better way of using a surge facility that's listed as a secondary isolation unit would have been to transfer a number of inmates from St. Albans who had tested negative and put them into the facility where you don't have any sign of an outbreak whatsoever. Having said all that, I do understand, and the public should know, that the 25 that are there are in an isolated area of the facility known as Alpha Unit. The folks who have done the inspections on our end have become convinced that they are sectioned off as well as you can possibly be under the circumstances. So I appreciate the fact that attention has been made for that to have happened. I guess all of us are praying and hoping that not one of those 25 suddenly ends up in a situation where we have another outbreak in a different corner. But I just want the public to know, I appreciate the efforts you've gone through, and the size of this has hit us all in a way, in a very fast time period, that we've all said and done things that are quite interesting, but we're managing to find ourselves getting back together, and I appreciate your efforts.
I appreciate that, Senator. I think a couple points, right? Because you and I have talked about this, and I've talked with the St. Johnsbury officials about this. The idea that it was going to be a secondary surge, no one anticipated what we got in Northwest. I did not think that we would get that number. I will also tell you that based on guidance and advice from the health department, leaving those, taking what would be deemed negative tests out of St. Albans and putting them somewhere else, we just didn't have the capacity anywhere else to do that, number one. Number two, we've already had a negative test come back positive. So to take folks that were there and put them somewhere else, based upon the advice from the epi team, could have been disastrous of moving. So if we had the virus only in St. Albans and somebody tests negative, doesn't mean they won't show up positive later. It would have put us in a position of polluting another facility. And so the surge went into effect only because of the pure number. And again, it's not an excuse, it's a reason. And, I hear you. And I want to say publicly, because I've said this to you, and I've said it publicly to St. Johnsbury Select Board on Monday night at their meeting. The communication problem was my issue, especially around the 25 inmates. I'm not a corrections person, so communications and corrections, like every organization, uses lingo. And when I was briefed that we were leaving kitchen workers behind and cleaners and other workers, I made the assumption that that was staff employed by corrections, when in fact it was the 25 inmates. So when I represented that to folks on Thursday and Friday of last week, that's where a lot of the confusion came from and a lot of the miscommunication. And I own that. And I've said that very clearly. And I do appreciate the fact that, no one worries about this population more than I do, because ultimately, as the Commissioner of Corrections, I'm responsible for them. So I'm in several sleepless nights, waking up in the morning, hoping I don't have a message that we have an outbreak in another facility. So I do appreciate your comments.
Thank
Do you
you.
think it's a good idea somewhere down the road to have a
We'll definitely have a debate.
meeting?
Absolutely. I mean, we're gonna, look, my message inside corrections right now, Senator, is pretty clear, and I think the staff will tell you this.
I think,
Don't waste the crisis.
Right.
Don't
I
waste
think
the crisis to make changes. And I'm seeing the culture inside corrections change as a result of this crisis. So,
I think every committee in the legislature should take a look at their areas of responsibility and how this could have been done differently, how it was done well, what was lacking. I think when we look back on this, though, we're going to find that testing, whether it be on the local level or the national level, is the big failure of government. And I can say personally that I believe that was the failure of the federal government, but that doesn't matter at this point. I think the testing on both the local level, we're seeing it at the Veterans Home right now here in Bennington, where all staff and residents have been tested, or most staff and residents have been tested, and we're awaiting the results. But as you said, some people may come back negative that are actually positive. And so that, I think, will be one of the areas that we all need to better understand. Commissioner, thanks very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Are there any other questions for Commissioner Baker? You stay safe up there in Arlington. It's
you as well, Senator. I
thank
hope
you.
everybody stays safe. It's, it's very scary times.
Yep, it is. But I'm glad you got those pictures of the Marines behind you. Let Don know that we enjoy seeing them weekly.
Your good friend Keelan just came in to make me lunch, Senator. So.
Oh, how nice. Keeneland Meals on Wheels.
Keelan's Meals on Wheels, sir.
Say hi to him for me.
Yeah, I will. Senator Benny,
thank
thanks
you,
for your support up there. It's appreciated. Thank you.
We'll keep it positive.
We will. Thank you.
Next is Michelle Childs. And Michelle's going to give us an update on something that evidently everybody else is, or not everybody, but the Health and Welfare Committees and the Health Human Services Committee in the House is looking at. We just wanted a brief update. It's really not a judiciary issue as much as it is a health and welfare issue, but it has to do with the foster care and whether or not visits are allowed by parents who or others who want to visit. And I'll just add that in talking with somebody at the program I used to run in Depot Street, they were actually, the family lives in Newport, and more family members were actually able to visit the child in Bennington than would have ever been done. They did it through Zoom, and so they actually had a better outcome than they might have had in person. So Michelle, if you wanted to update us.
Sure. So I'll just do a quick overview. As Senator Sears mentioned, Human Services has been meeting. They met twice last week, once this week, and then they're meeting again this afternoon on it. And then Senate Health and Welfare also met on it yesterday. The issue is, I think, as you know, is that when you have a child come into state custody, there is a statutory requirement that unless the particular circumstances dictate that the child shouldn't have contact with biological mom and dad, then there's to be a parent-child contact order issued by the court that sets forth visitation for the child while they're in foster care. And so you have that in Title 33. And so all of those orders exist now, just like all the other orders that were issued without any contemplation that we'd be facing what we're facing now. And so the question that's coming up in the CHINS context is the same that you've also heard as it relates to like the Title 15 orders in cases where you have children of divorced parents, where you have these parent-child contact that say, you know, child has contact with mom every other weekend, you know, it's supervised, unsupervised, whatever the conditions are. And then you had the governor's addendum to the executive order on March 24th that was the stay at home, stay safe. So there's these questions out there about what do you do with these orders and how do you comply? Do you comply with those orders? And so the governor's stay at home order was on March 24th. The next day on March 25th, Commissioner Levine issued a recommendation that that in-person parent-child contact as ordered in those CHINS cases be temporarily suspended. So that was on the 25th. And so DCF, in response to that recommendation from the health commissioner, then requested of the court a blanket stay of all of those parent-child contact orders. And then right after they requested that, there was some federal guidance that came out with respect to those types of cases that, and that recommendation from the feds was don't issue blanket stays. You should still continue to proceed on a case-by-case basis. And then the court, Judge Grierson responded back to Ken on March 30th, declining DCF's request for the blanket stay. And Judge Grierson responded that the court did not read the governor's order as affecting a blanket ban on parent-child visitation. And I'm just going to read here from a moment from Judge Grierson's memo, is that further, they believe that the superior judges should continue to address motions to stay or modify the parent-child contact orders on an individual basis, which allows them to take into account specific circumstances of the case before them and exercise their discretion accordingly. So that's how it's been, that's how it's operating now. Yesterday, I think the testimony was there's been about 15 filings for modifications in response to COVID for these, but some of them may be duplicates. There are 6 current decisions in those particular cases. My understanding from DCF is that out of about 900 families, there's only about 30 or so that have not agreed to replacing in-person contact with some type of electronic communication during the pandemic. So they're trying to work through those, but DCF is scrambling and working really hard to try to figure out how they can facilitate contact between parents and their children who are in foster care. But everybody's trying to, I think there's a lot of folks working on this issue. Nobody's really kind of come up with a perfect answer here. The House Human Services Committee last week was looking as though they were leaning towards doing some legislation, doing some language for session law, saying that during the COVID-19 pandemic and any kind of gubernatorial order for staying at home, that the in-person parent-child contact should be suspended, and then allowing parents the ability to petition the court on a certain basis for having in person, although they've seemed to kind of back away from that. So I'm not really sure what they're going to be doing, but there are a lot of folks involved in this. I know it's been, in talking to the folks at DCF, it's been very overwhelming for them, because what they're trying to do is, in all of those cases where they're replacing in-person with electronic communication, they're trying to get stipulations between the parties to file, because under the current law, anybody can file for a modification of the parent-child contact order, and you don't have to go through and have a hearing and go through all that if you can get folks to agree. So I think what they've been doing is working really hard to try to get agreements on all the parties, and then file a stipulation in that case. But you can imagine it's pretty labor intensive. But right now they are going on a case-by-case basis. And I'm not sure what either of the committees are going to do, whether or not they're going to put forth any legislation.
Well, thank you for that update, Michelle. I wanted to make clear that as I understood Judge Grierson, the decision was made by the Supreme Court, not necessarily Judge Grierson on his own.
Yes, sorry. Yes,
Just
Judge
to
Grierson
clarify,
speaking for the court.
Because we do tend to shoot the messenger from
Yes.
time to time. I kind of divided this subject into two different groups, and I don't know if the committees are. One of those children who are in the care and custody of the Commissioner of the Department of Children and Families, and the other are folks who are under, their kids, they've been divorced or whatever, and there's visitation agreements, and most of the time those families can work things out. I know in my own family, we have a situation similar to that where the child is actually with her mother right now. She's normally with her father, but because he's working and she's not working, they decided to do it that way. And he sees her every now and then when she comes to Bennington. But I think people work things out generally. But when you're at DCF custody, it's a little different situation since the state is responsible. And I'm wondering if legislation were passed that actually said that, for DCF, they make the call, similar to what you just talked about, would that be constitutional? Given the power of the judiciary, the equal branches of government.
Right. That is a complex issue, because we have the orders that are in, how does the executive order play in with the judicial orders? And I'm not sure about that, honestly. You also have issues around parental rights with regard to care and control of their children. They're somewhat diminished because of the circumstances in a Chin's case, but
right.
Can you just say, without giving the parents due process, having the court involved in making a decision whether to modify, are you stripping away to a certain point that's unconstitutional the parents' ability to be involved in directing their children's lives? So I don't know, actually.
I'm actually very relieved that the Health and Welfare and Human Services committees are tackling this, and would be happy to. I'm waiting to see what they come up with, but at this point, there are some interesting concepts here. You have the legislative branch, the executive branch saying one thing, the judicial branch saying another, and the legislative branch being asked to take a look at this issue.
Right. And obviously time is an issue here. So whether or not
if they solve it by next June, then what, and things are semi-normal, or whatever the new normal is going to look like. Senator White had a question.
This isn't really a question, and it's related to this in a way, but I had an interesting conversation with the sheriff this morning here, and I asked him about if they had seen an uptick in domestic violence, cases, and he said not particularly. There was a little bump, and then in here in Windham County anyway, it hasn't increased dramatically. But what he did say was that they've seen a huge decrease in the number of mandated child abuse reports from mandated reporters. And because there's no one watching the kids now except the parents, so there's no daycare provider or school or those mandated reporters. And that there really isn't much to do about that, I guess, but I found that very interesting and a bit disturbing that those reports are going way down, and because there is no one to report them anymore.
I think DCF testified that the reports are going down, but the calls that come in are more to the, I don't know what the term is, but more are verified. What little reports that they do have, a higher percentage of them are actual abuse. Senator Benning.
Michelle, I don't know whether you were part of this conversation or not, but Commissioner Curley was in a public setting somewhere in that March timeframe, and I asked her specifically whether or not custodial orders or DCF foster parent situations were subject to the order to stay at home. And the response that I got then was they are dealt with on an individual basis with the court system, and people should abide by those court orders. So I wanted to throw that into the mix of your layout of chronological events. And I don't know, as I look back, what date specifically we had that conversation, but it was in a public setting. And Dick, I want to throw in a couple of things that I think this committee needs to consider when we're talking about potential legislation. There are many situations where divorcing parents or separated parents have a week on, week off with children. The days of one parent having, quote, custody and the other having visitation every other weekend and some night in between for dinner, that's long gone. So the concept itself of visitation has changed dramatically through the years. In the case of DCF, it is frequently the case that it's not just one child we're talking about multiple children that have been removed from a home at various age levels. And some of them are in one foster placement, some in a different foster placement. So you have multiple placements. All of those foster placements rise and fall in the ability of internet connections, like we all have those problems ourselves. So having access is problematic. I'm glad that DCF is working to get stipulations out. My worry here is that we as a committee or as a legislative body try to pass legislation that is sweeping in its nature, presuming that all cases can be dealt with in a single legislative event. And I absolutely don't believe that's possible. So if I present pushback somewhere down the road, it's only because I look at this from the perspective of all of these cases having to be dealt with on an individual basis by the courts, which is why I believe the Supreme Court said, we're going to let it be a case-by-case basis. I think that the conflict of having a blanket expectation from a legislative point of view would be ratcheted up considerably because all of these cases are different. And if you leave it the way it is now, with DCF especially on one end trying to iron out stipulations, that eliminates a large portion of the potential problem. The remainder of those cases should be dealt with on a case-by-case basis in order for people to be able to fashion either stipulations or have the court figure out what the best result is. But to try to do a sweeping piece of legislation that takes everything into account would be absolutely disastrous from a family court perspective in my opinion. I'm also on a listserv with the people who are representing.
Speaking of
both
technology,
children and,
Joe, we're losing you.
parents. Yeah, I'm noticing that I'm doing the old Max Headroom situation. It may be our local internet service is reacting. I'm hoping you're still hearing me.
We are hearing you,
but
but
the bottom line is this list. Okay. The bottom line, though, is that this listserv is now lighting up with people who are in that situation of representing both parents and children, worried about the way DCF is securing these stipulations. And I believe Matt Valerio is in here somewhere. I'm thinking he's going to talk about that.
I didn't
We all
mean
should be
to-
aware that
okay.
that kind of. I just want to let you know that there's another perspective that might be in the mix.
I completely understand that, and we could spend the whole morning on this. I was just trying to get an update from Michelle on where the other two committees are at and looking at this. And I kind of want to, I would just say that it's one of those things that I didn't anticipate being a problem, but a real problem, as you know, is when do you get court time to hear this? If, for example, one parent or DCF thinks that this should not be a visit, when do you get court time to hear that case? So those are some of the realities that groups are facing. But I just really wanted an update on it, and I hear you very strong. I don't think this is an easy subject. That's kind of why I said I was happy that the two health and welfare committees are dealing with it.
If I can just let you know one thing, because I know you're running behind and you have to go, is so the current statute, the court is supposed to use the best interest of the child as the guiding principle. And something that might wind its way to you through some type of legislation, not in terms of like a blanket stay or anything like that, is the possibility of an amendment to the statute to allow for the court to consider kind of the totality of the circumstances and to take into account when you have basically a declaration of a state of emergency related to a pandemic, that the court could look at not just the best interest of the child, but also take into account recommendations from the health commissioner, look at the foster family. Maybe is there somebody who's vulnerable who is in the foster family? Look at what's going on with the biological parent's family. And my understanding again from Judge Grierson is that courts are doing that now. And so they're kind of interpreting the existing language broadly, but the existing language doesn't really quite get at it, but the courts making do with what's there. So there's something might come out at some point, and obviously it'll come to you guys because it's amending court orders.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it very much. I'd like to move on to the voting on the judges and Justice Cohen. And Peggy, do you have, how do we gonna?
I'll call the roll as normal, and then I'll keep track. I obviously have a copy of it, and I'll bring it when I do get to go to the State House.
Oh, okay. So you can actually get the copies of the nomination.
Oh, the nomination letters. Oh, that I
Well, we
didn't.
have to give something to the Senate Secretary.
Yeah.
We don't physically have those.
Yep, I can
They're
talk
in
to
your
Mike.
file.
Yeah, I can talk to Mike Ferrand because he is in the State House. And we can talk to Senator Blumen.
Well, we don't have to do it today, but it's
Yeah.
just that they would need to physically be brought up to the Senate Secretary.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
That
Yeah.
they've been confirmed, or this committee has recommended that they be confirmed or not confirmed. Senator
Yeah.
White?
There is going to be a floor session on Friday.
Right.
It'll be very short, but if we can, and they don't actually, I haven't been physically bringing bills up to the secretary. If it comes from a legislator's email, it's considered being brought there. So we might be able to confirm them on Friday.
Okay, well, I'll let I'll let Mike Ferrant and Peggy Delaney work that out with
Yep.
John Bloomer, but
Okay.
I did sign out the bill and sent a copy of it, the last one we did. Was it 114? I signed out the copy, mailed that or emailed that signed copy to John Bloomer. Anyway, Peggy, who's the first judge?
Superior Court Judge Lisa Warren.
Okay, Superior Court Judge Lisa Warren
Yep.
from the St. Johnsbury area. Is there any discussion about Judge Warren? And we heard from her. I was fairly impressed, and Joe knows her well, I think.
So moved.
Senator Benning has moved that we report favorably on the confirmation of Lisa Warren as a Superior Court judge.
Are you ready
Any
for the roll
further
call?
discussion?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay. Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Benning,
Yes.
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator Nika,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes. Senator Benning, would you like to report her confirmation?
Be happy to whenever in the future that happens.
Well, the fear is that it has to happen before we adjourn and can't get lost there. So I didn't want to lose it. And
Sure.
the judges were a little nervous. The next one is Judge
Superior Court Carrie Ann McDonald, Katie.
Carrie Ann Katie McDonald from Dover. Is there a motion by, I think Senator White moved that we report favorably on,
I did, I believe.
I thought I heard that.
You did. I just hadn't pushed the button yet.
Oh, okay.
Do we do seconds on these or not?
No.
No, okay.
Generally haven't.
Okay. Senator White,
Is there any,
Yes.
well, first I have to ask if there's any discussion, Peggy.
sorry.
It's okay. Is there any discussion on Judge McDonald, Katie?
Sounds very capable from what we heard.
I think so. Okay, Peggy, if you'd please call the roll.
Sure. Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Benning,
Yes.
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator Nika,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes. So
Great.
Senator White, would you, since she's in your district, would you like to report?
I would, thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we have Supreme Court Justice William Cohen.
Correct.
I'll move that we report favorably on Judge Cohen. I actually had an opportunity to meet with him down here in Bennington when he was working in the courts here on several occasions, and found him to be very good. Is there any further discussion on Justice Cohen?
I just would like to say he's come through judicial retention several times and had good grades, so to speak, and has done a nice job mentoring some other people as well.
Good. Any
All right.
further discussion? Peggy, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Benning,
Yes.
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator Nika,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes. Senator Nika, would you like to report on Justice Cohen?
Be glad to.
Thank you. Well, that completes the justices and judges. The next item on the agenda is a 5-minute break.
Okay, so
And
I'm going to, if it's okay with you, Senator Nick, Senator Sears, I'm going to mute everyone. I'm going to put a state crest up, so that's what everybody will see when they come. And then in 5 minutes, we'll come back and I'll unmute everybody.
Okay, let's be back at 20 past 11.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. I didn't get up earlier. Connor? Did you hear from Barbara yet? No. You didn't hear back from yesterday's message? No. It surprises me. We should call her again. Can you look up a new one, try and talk to you? Gonna have to be quiet until when I get back to the meeting, you're gonna have to just be quiet for like 5 minutes, all right? That's not being quiet. Like when I say not a sound, I mean not a sound. Okay, Connor, you're gonna have to stop for 5 minutes, all right?
Ready to get back?
Okay, yep, hold on. Stop share. Okay, okay, we're ready, we're back.
I think we're ready to get back into
Yep.
meeting mode. And first witness is James Pepper
Senator
from the
Sears?
Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, and
Before we start, can I
we'll,
say you're a very kind
I
chair to give.
think we're all
a
muted,
break?
Peggy.
I don't think so.
I unmuted
Peggy,
myself.
can you unmute us, please?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Senator Sears, can you hear me? What's going on here? Let's see.
I unmuted myself.
I did too.
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Senator Sears?
Apparently not.
His personal volume might be off on his computer.
But it worked before.
He may have turned it off right before the break.
He also may need to put on his headphones.
Oh, his headphones. That's what it is.
We can't hear, I can't, oh. My own fault.
Ever.
Oh, sorry.
There, may I-
Thank you. I messed up. I forgot the earplug.
before we
Thank
start,
you.
thank
Yeah.
you for giving us a break. You're a very kind chair. I've never let my committee take a break because I'm afraid they won't come back.
Well, you know, where can they go? Although
Oh,
I'm looking at the wind out there. I'm in my, looking out my back window and the wind is really whipping around the pool. I'm glad I can't go in today. Pepper, if you'd get started on the issue of,
Take your volumes down.
oh, I wonder why. You can't hear me?
turn it up.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well.
No, something to do with the speaker. How about now?
Improving.
Any higher? Or maybe I can. Oh. I don't know what happened to my microphone. Can you
I
hear
can
me now?
barely hear you.
Mhm.
All right, I'm gonna go off the earplugs and
Brian Campion.
Brian Campion, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now. All right, can you hear me at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right,
Oh,
There
I'll
you go.
try to, there, oh my God, now I'm hearing you so loud. We'll start with Pepper.
Okay, I'll get started here and I'll be brief. I recognize the time limitations that we have today. I was originally going to come to talk about a piece of legislation that the state's attorneys have been working on. I'll describe it for the committee. It's not fully ready for kind of prime time for committee consideration, but I can talk about it a little bit. And then I'll talk about what the state's attorneys are doing currently to help reduce the prison population and slow the spread of COVID-19. So as you may be aware, the state's attorney's offices have received north of 50 or more motions to either reconsider hold without status or just to resentence incarcerated individuals. And none of these motions are saying that the underlying reasons for the hold without or the sentence is improper. They're saying that because of COVID-19 and because of a underlying health issue or the age of the offender, that this person cannot be in the facility. And so a lot of our state's attorneys thought, well, you know, if this is really about moving people out of the facility and not about the underlying facts of the case, then maybe some sort of expanded access to medical furlough or to compassionate release potentially would be a better avenue than to resentence them. Of course, just writing a few words in the statute on the medical furlough side is not going to give adequate protections to victim participation, to ensure that there actually is a nexus with COVID-19 or that that the individuals will be able to reintegrate and access health services when they're on the outside. So the state's attorneys are at work thinking about those issues and how to craft a response to those types of issues. We've not had an opportunity to engage with all of the interested stakeholders yet. So it would be inappropriate, I think, for us to put forward something at this time. But we will continue to work on that. And as you know, this is a very dynamic situation. And as kind of the facts on the ground change, I think this might be an avenue that we could try and explore more fully with the committee. So that being said, the state's attorneys are doing a number of things. They've all agreed to certain principles to help not only reduce the number of people that are in the prisons currently, but also just to stop the churn, to stop new people coming in. And I don't think I've reviewed this list with the committee yet, and I think it's an important list, not just now, but also moving forward. All new nonviolent offenses are being cited to a date at least 8 weeks out at this point, sometime in June. June 15th is what most counties are looking at. That includes violations of conditions of release that do not directly impact public safety. We've reviewed all of our current citations and have recited those out to kind of that same 8-week period in June. We are continuing to flash cite and lodge individuals where appropriate, where there are violent felonies and there's no combination of conditions that could adequately protect the public. We are continuing to flash cite individuals that are harassing their victims, for instance. So that is ongoing. We've reviewed all of our active arrest warrants and are seeking to quash the ones where the kind of public health concerns outweigh the public safety interests. So that's in order to minimize police contact with individuals. We've reviewed our entire list of detainees, excluding the kind of federal detainees. And as far as the hold without, we're kind of letting those come to us from prisoners' rights organizations. And we've released, we've agreed to conditions, to modify conditions to release huge numbers of detainees. I think, Monica Weaver has the exact numbers, but, I think we're down to somewhere in the realm of 300 for the first time in a decade, which is, very impressive, I think, in the past 3 weeks. We're reviewing pending cases and offering time served where appropriate. And now we've are just reviewing the entire incarcerated population. We started with individuals that are kind of lower risk to reoffend, people that were within 6 months of their minimum. Now we're looking at that kind of entire population and looking for places where we can maybe stipulate to release. And I think the outcome of this, you heard Commissioner Baker speak on this earlier. The kind of baseline number that the department has been using, the kind of pre-COVID baseline, the population was 1,671, and that was on February 24th of this year. The number as of 9 o'clock this morning was 1,406, which is a decrease of 255, roughly 15% of the prison population. So that is in no way strictly because of the work the state's attorneys are doing. This is the entire criminal justice system, law enforcement, the defense bar, corrections, all working overtime to try and respond to this crisis. And it's just been an impressive effort, honestly. Of course, it's really important to remember something that DOC has said repeatedly, something that is kind of, frankly, the basis of justice reinvestment, is that a good reentry plan is essential to ensuring to reduce recidivism. We've seen the data shows that low risk offender with a bad recidivism or an inadequate resources, community resources, access to housing, access to MAT, has a much higher likelihood of readmission or recidivism than a higher risk individual with a good reentry plan. And so we need to ensure that there's a continuity of services on the housing side, on the community-based resources as these folks are being released.
Thank you, Pepper. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
But I know there are probably a number of questions, but I guess the first one I have is, when this is over and we have this surge of people coming into court who've been cited, I saw a guy that was doing 100 and some odd miles an hour on a 35-mile-an-hour limit. He's been cited sometime in June. I imagine there's going to be hundreds of other people like this coming into court. Do you expect to increase those numbers back to the 1,600 and whatever it was on February, March 1st? I mean, do you expect to see this surge come back, or can we look at these numbers as how can we deal with these folks who have been let out and avoid bringing low-level offenders back in?
I think that is a critical question, not just with the kind of backlog that we anticipate, but also, we don't know what the world is going to look like as this kind of state of emergency restrictions start to lift with respect to people that have no job, potentially no housing, that are under extreme financial and emotional stress, and the kind of potential consequences for property crimes or any number of crimes that might result because of that. And a lot of the state's attorneys are starting to reimagine what to do as what the criminal justice system should look like as, we emerge from this COVID pandemic. And I think that what is very fortunate for the state of Vermont is that we had CSG come to our state and look at our prison population and start thinking about what sort of resources do we need in order to move people safely out of prisons? What sort of resources do we need to move people to lower the detainee population? And they've largely given us a roadmap for a lot of that, but it, of course, is going to require some investment in transitional housing, some investment in domestic violence programming, and kind of community-based solutions that unfortunately cost money in a time where,
Actually, that's the next agenda item really is an update on justice reinvestment. But it's a good point. I think all the things that you need to keep people out of jail will be in short supply if the money isn't there to support those programs. So hopefully we'll continue to make it a priority to have those halfway houses and other programs necessary, like batterer intervention and so forth. Senator Baruth had a question, I think.
Yeah, and I may have missed it along the line, but this population that's being processed and let out, are they tested before they leave the facilities?
I don't know.
I would have to defer to DOC on the release end of things.
I don't see any, there's nobody left here from DOC. I don't know if they're tested or not.
Because it seems, I know the commissioner
Maybe
has.
Joe does. Joe,
Yep.
Joe, did you know?
No, I wasn't.
Oh,
I was going to
okay.
ask a different question. I wasn't.
Oh, okay.
That one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the commissioner's objection to blanket testing has been that they didn't want to expend that many tests, but this is a very small, finite population that we're releasing out from the prison where they may have been exposed, and we don't know because they're not blanket testing. So it seems like the very least you could do is test these individuals and not release them until we know the result of the test.
Good point.
For some reason, I seem to remember, and I won't even say, for some reason I seem to think that there is a quarantine process that happens before release, but I'm not sure. So
some of them are on bail conditions, though. Wouldn't they just? I mean, there's two different groups. One are the detention group that's being let out, and then there's another group. So I don't who have been incarcerated. Maybe Matt knows. I don't know. We can check with Matt. Did you?
Yeah. First of all, on the way in, everybody is screened. That's the first thing. So when you're talking about people picked up on warrants, before they ever get to a facility, they go through their screening questions. Of course, we've learned that people who are completely asymptomatic could be carrying the virus, and but it does seem to have had some positive effect. Nevertheless, I do know that at all in Northwest and in the Northern State facility, all of the inmates and the staff from DOC have been tested. Now, I don't know that that's the case in every facility across the entire state, but I don't know that if you're getting released on bail, if you haven't exhibited any symptoms, that you're going to be tested. But I do know that the people who have been held and are getting modifications of sentences. And there's not that many of those, to be frank. Those people have been tested.
Good, thank you. I think and also the commissioner said that people coming in are being isolated for 14 days. Joe, you had a question?
James, you were talking earlier about coming up with a plan from state's attorney's angle that might be agreeing to stipulate to sentence modifications. A couple of weeks ago, Judge Grierson brought a proposal that we modify Rule 35 to enable stipulated agreements between the state and the defense. The judges could then take into consideration that would be different than what Rule 35 currently says. At the time, David Scher said the Attorney General's office was in favor. You folks were not in favor. Have you shifted that position?
Our position has not shifted. There are a number of considerations that we think are absent from the proposal that was put forward. But the ones that we're looking to stipulate to are directly related to COVID-19. And, it's really more that we're not contesting certain of them. And I think that there's a little bit of a difference there. And we're putting the kind of safeguards that we were looking for in place before we consider that.
There's been a general agreement. I thought we expressed the desire to look, this was a permanent change as Judge Grierson recommended it. And so I thought we were I plan, who knows when the new normal will start. But I do plan to have hearings on this issue when we get back to somewhat of at least in-person meetings. So really, I found it difficult to meet remotely on issues where there may be significant disagreement. Judge Grierson?
Just briefly, thank you, Senator. The original proposal was to be in effect only during the emergency period. But putting that aside, what's been interesting since I last appeared before this committee to talk about this issue is that we have been receiving some requests from the state and the defense that have agreed to revise sentences beyond the 90 days. And we haven't acted on those yet because we're not sure what to do with them when we don't have the authority. But we are seeing some agreements to revise sentences after the 90-day period. And so I'm a little concerned that we're caught in the middle. Some of these people and these people are being released specifically because of COVID-19 issues. They may have a relatively short period of time before they're due to be released anyway. But I am seeing some of those, and we are stuck with what do we do with them? So I just throw that out there. And I would say, just in a final comment, I think Senator Sears asked what happens to this population when the emergency is over. Quite frankly, if bail isn't being imposed on nonviolent offenders now because of the COVID-19, you really have to ask yourselves, well, why would, once the emergency is over, what's changed? If they can be released now on conditions, they ought to be released after the emergency on conditions. I think it's an opportunity to take a look at what population we're imposing bail on, a closer look. All of these people coming in June are going to continue to be released. If they come in on a citation, they're going to be released on conditions. And I think this is an opportunity to start looking at not using all the conditions of release that we're so prone to use. There's a lot of reasons to look at release. What we learned from this emergency, I guess, is what I'm really saying, that there's a lot of changes that have come about that we don't have to go back to the previous normal. I think we can learn from this process.
I hope so. Matt, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the stipulation. There are some state's attorneys and defenders who believe that there's a constitutional basis beyond Rule 35 to allow modification of sentences after the 90-day sentence reconsideration window in Rule 35. And oftentimes that's even has been in the past a basis for the settlement of post-conviction relief matters that are completely unrelated to the COVID-19 situation. And that basis is one that has, in some counties and with some states' attorneys, has been the basis to go forward with stipulations. And we've had some judges who have signed off on those agreements currently. And we have had others who don't think they have authority to do it. And so, from the defense perspective, and I guess the perspective of the state's attorneys who have agreed to these stipulations, that you kind of take your, window as it presents itself. And this is the same thing we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, but in some counties, with some state's attorneys, you have had the opportunity to modify sentences based upon the virus situation, the vulnerability of the client, and the ability of the Department of Corrections to respond to that on the inside, given the client's medical considerations and their vulnerability. So it is, again, it's one of those things that it's different not in every county, but it's different in some counties compared to others. And I do appreciate the fact that the state's attorneys are making some effort to try to get a consistent response. In the meantime, there are, I thought there were 46 motions pending with the court now involving both bail and post sentence reconsideration. But relatively, the number's not that huge, but it's, I guess, bigger than normal.
Okay. Can we shift gears to David sure had a brief comment about the racial disparities panel, and then shift gears to justice reinvestment.
Sure. Thank you, David Chair with the Attorney General's Office, and I will keep it brief. The only point that the panel wanted to bring forward and that did bring forward in testimony in front of House Corrections Institutions was a request to be part of the group that, and this is, sorry, let me back up. This is related to justice reinvestment and the study section of that bill with respect to being included in the data study group that would figure out how to better and more accurately and consistently collect data around the state. Because that had been a major part of their report and had spent a lot of time working on it, they did request to be added to Section 19A of the Justice Reinvestment Bill. I don't think that's a particularly controversial request. I think it makes sense. And just wanted to notify the committee of that and let the committee know the only reason that wasn't brought up earlier was simply a matter of timing. The racial disparities panel doesn't meet except for once a month. This committee's discussions of the bill sort of occurred in between meetings. The other point I just wanted to bring forward was the racial disparities panel sunset. I think there was agreement to lift that sunset, and we just want to make sure that that does happen. And it may make sense to put that in the Justice Reinvestment Bill in order to ensure that that does get through, because that just makes sense, especially given the fact that they're contemplated as one of the entities to work on the study issues in justice reinvestment.
Everything is up in the air, but I do know, in terms of when we get back to dealing with other bills, and I would hope that we can avoid a conference committee on justice reinvestment. I know the House has been working on it, and that was the reason that I asked Ellen to join us today from her remote location and to give us kind of an update on it. But one of the things, and I heard from the state's attorneys, there's been some confusion about a day for a day on the probation end that was in the Senate version. Ellen, are you available right now?
Yes. Sorry,
Oh,
let me
great.
start my video.
Oh, okay. Hi, Ellen. Nice to
Hi,
see you.
everybody.
Hi. Can you and David kind of summarize where we're at on the day for a day at this point? I know in talking with Representative Emmons, they were having some concerns about it. The
Yeah.
probation.
Yes, and I think Bryn also might be in a good position to update from the House Corrections and Institutions Committee. But David, I would defer to you and Bryn at this point. I've been tuning into those discussions, but not weighing in very directly, other than trying to track where all the conversation is going.
Bryn and David, you want
I'd let Bryn go first if she wants to.
to? Nobody wants to go first. Bryn, you're stuck with it. Thank you.
I'm happy to. Hello, committee. It's nice to see you all.
Good to see you.
So my understanding is that you'd like a little update about what about the progress of S338 as it's moving through House Corrections. Is that right?
Yeah, but
Or do you wanna
particularly on
specifically talk
the
about-
probation, it seems to have been confused. People are confused
Yeah,
about
so okay. I'm happy to talk about, I'll do my best to summarize what some of the other testimony has been about those sections. I think that they've been a bit confused about a couple of things about those sections. The first is whether or not that credit applies to the actual sentence of probation as opposed to the suspended incarcerative sentence. I think they're clearer on that now. The Attorney General's office sent them a clarifying email yesterday, I believe, and I testified yesterday, and I think that confusion has been cleared up. But they also had some questions about whether or not the credit would apply to only the minimum sentence, the minimum suspended sentence, or also the maximum suspended sentence. And I think that there's been some testimony that the bill is pretty clear that that the credit only applies to the minimum sentence.
That's what I thought.
Yes, so that may have been cleared up now too. The Department of Corrections testified. So here's another kind of issue that has bogged down that committee, is that the Department of Corrections testified that they wanted there to be language in those sections that made it clear that it would be the court's responsibility to keep track of the days of credit that would apply to the underlying sentence. So they've requested some additional language that would make it abundantly clear that it was the court that was responsible for making a note on the sentencing documents of the total number of days that have accrued that would apply towards the minimum sentence. And they haven't looked at a new draft yet. I'm working on a new draft that they'll see tomorrow. They've gotten about halfway through the bill with respect to a new draft. So that's where we're at.
That scares me. I mean, if you're only halfway through and they're doing a new draft. Jeanette?
I just was curious about why this bill went to Corrections and Institutions instead of Judiciary. Do we know? It seems to me it's more a Judiciary issue, but maybe
I think you'd have to ask the speaker.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
I was part of some discussions about that between Representative Grad and Representative Emmons, and without knowing exactly how those committees split up this work, I think the way that Representative Grad put it to me is that typically House Judiciary handles everything pre-sentencing, and then sort of post-sentencing things go to House Corrections. I don't know, Bryn, if that feels like a good way of breaking that down.
Yep, they did speak yesterday about the specific sections that are going to go to House Judiciary, and those are the probation sections, the racial disparities study section, and also that Rule 75 section, which is that the due process provisions for when a person is revoked from parole.
Okay, well, I worry that it gets bogged down. So when you say they're having a new draft, are there more concerns with the probation section or are other sections where there's been dramatic concern? Because the probation section was actually added. It wasn't part of the original recommendations from the Justice Center. So I've always felt that that's a little separate issue, although I support the idea of making sure it somehow that when people make it through the first 7 to 12 months of probation, that generally, that's the time, if they're going to mess up, it'll be in that early stages. And I thought that this recognized that and was a way to reward that behavior. But are there other sections where you're running into trouble?
I wouldn't characterize any of the suggestions that have been made to the committee as dramatic. I think that there's been some concern about the sort of process of how presumptive parole is administrated, both on the Department of Corrections and the parole board's end. But to me, so far, it sounds like that there's just going to be some clarifying language in there. I don't think it's a dramatic rewrite of that section. And I would also note that the chair has made several comments on the record that any changes that are made to the bill are going to need to be sort of run by this committee, because there's I think the consensus that they don't want to go to conference on this bill. So that is a part of their conversation.
Good. David?
Just really briefly, Senator, I did want to note that I do think that there has been clarification and understanding brought to the probation section. So I think it should move forward. Okay. I've very recently in the last had a chance to review suggestions to clarify that section, and I have no issue with them. I think they don't change policy. It is just clarifying language. So I'm hopeful that that can move forward without any incident. It's just some clarification about how things will get reported on sentencing documents, which I think is fine and doesn't change the policy at all. So I'm hopeful that we can move forward without any serious concerns or additional discussion on that.
If Matt or Judge Grierson or Pepper, any comments on this, on the process that's going on?
I was not aware. I was not aware of
Go
the
ahead,
issue relating to the court calculating the credit for time on a probation warrant. I don't see that as a significant issue. I'm sure there would be a discussion anytime it's in front of us anyway, if there is a disagreement about the credit that's allowed. So I don't see that as a big issue. Hopefully they could resolve that.
Any other, Matt, did you have any comment?
No, I mean, I don't think that's a big problem either. Usually defense and prosecutors will get together and say, hey, that X amount of time, the court looks at it and says, yeah, fine, and I'll put it in the minimum.
Right.
If there's some dispute, each side will say whatever their side is and the court makes a decision.
Good. Pepper, do you have any?
Our primary concern has been addressed. David kind of reached out to me yesterday and explained some of the concerns or some of the ways that it would work out. But we wanted to make sure that the courts were able to calculate this day for a day adequately, and that the complex situations wouldn't present any problems that might lead to lawsuits. So I think sorry.
That may be part of the problem. We keep talking about a day for a day on probation, and will it lead to longer probationary sentences, that sort of thing. I didn't really see it as a day for a day. I saw it as a way to get people off probation sooner if they're doing well, and not drag them out where they may have one step backwards that results in 2.5 years on a 3-year probationary term minimum mess things up. So maybe we should.
I think the difficulty will be, if I recall the way the statute or the bill proposes the calculation, it would be from the time the court finds the person in violation. As opposed, in other words, the behavior that triggers the violation may occur today. It may not get filed until sometime 2 months from now, for whatever reason. That's entirely in the hands of Department of Corrections of when they bring that to the attention of the state's attorney. So the person may in fact be out of compliance for a month or two, but under the statute, as I recall the language, they would still be getting credit for that time. So my concern was that, would that mean that the Department of Corrections might be filing violations sooner than they do now? In other words, now if someone's out of compliance, they may work with them, try to encourage them to get involved in whatever the issue is, if it's counseling of some sort. And I don't know whether or not they will be quicker to file a violation now. That was my biggest concern with the language.
Ellen? Yeah,
I think something that I heard yesterday in a lot of discussion was the House Corrections and Institutions Committee members really wanting to make sure that they're considering unintended consequences of everything in the bill. And so on this point, something I recall is a lot of discussion about whether or not the way things are being set up on the probation side, does that or does it not create sort of perverse incentives for people to violate, be revoked, and earn different amounts of time if they're reincarcerated, and sort of working through that. And I think Bryn's done a really great job of working with the committee to consider how that may or may not happen. But I think generally they're being very thorough at looking at these pieces to try to make sure that where they can, they're not changing things and trying to anticipate certain behavior changes as well. And I'll just note on the presumptive parole side, I think a lot of that discussion so far has focused on similarly working out process points on victim notification and just really making sure that it's clear that victims will be notified, who's notifying, how they were notified. So that's all stuff that again, it's details that are really important and seem valid to kind of work out and make sure everyone is clear on, and where necessary, that's clarified in the bill.
I think, and I don't know how, I may be using the wrong terminology, but it seems to me that if we were actually down to 1,406 people incarcerated in the state, or whatever the number might be, obviously it might rise back to 1,500, but we should have as a goal of those numbers moving forward. And how do we keep those numbers where they are today? And that would seem to coincide with justice reinvestment. And I'm wondering if it would make sense for this committee to look at that issue as well as we go along here, as to what measures were taken during this. And I have not heard of people, committing atrocious crimes who've been released. So it's I'm curious. And Matt, maybe you can help me with this, but I think that's the question we really have to ask. How do we not go back to 1,700 or whatever the number was?
Yeah, as a result of this situation, we've been getting much more statistical information from the Department of Corrections, and Jim Baker's been great with this. I talk to him way too much, usually a couple of times a day. The good thing is I've known him for 30 years, so it's not that big a deal. But we are now, as of yesterday, the population was 1,401. He thinks we're going to be under 1,400. But of that, and that includes those who are being held in Mississippi. And even at that, we have 457 people who are being held beyond their minimum, 376 of which are for furlough or probation violations that don't involve new charges. And there's 100 held for lack of approved housing. So even with what we have on the outside right now, there seems like there's some area for improvement or continued reduction. you know, Baker said to me, and others on the side have said, you know, it kind of makes you question what we were doing with some of these folks. And I don't know that I do think this is an interesting opportunity, but I keep getting these numbers, and I'm understanding that we're probably going to be under 1,400 by the end of today, which would be amazing.
Well, he actually said there were 1,406. They had 5 more entries today or yesterday between now and 8:30 this morning. They were at 1,406. So
then you get done with the lodgings, and you might be down under that 14.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So anyway.
Is there a way to recalculate our numbers, Ellen? Is there a way that we could look at who's been released?
So
Not the detention population, but rather the sentence population that's been released?
the Justice Center is actually working right now on putting together some coordinated outreach to all states, and Vermont obviously would be one that would be fairly easy to make this call, but just to ask, what are you doing and what are the impacts of that, and to try to start chronicling the policy and practice changes that different states are putting into place. And in Vermont, that's a little bit easier, partly because it's a unified system. So whatever is happening locally is happening at the state level. Essentially, in other states, jails are making a ton of decisions that are harder to track. So that's something that we're really interested in doing, and I'm going to be reaching out to Commissioner Baker later today. I'll say real back of the napkin math. When I heard Commissioner Baker earlier this morning say that they were at 1,406, the number that we had the state at when we started Justice Reinvestment 2 back in August was at, I think, 1,764. So just to go from 1,764 to 1,406, that's an 18% drop in the incarcerated population. And that's more than what Justice Reinvestment 1 achieved. So it's huge. And I don't know if the state should expect to sustain that entirely, but there are lots of questions about what that means and where to go.
If, you know, since the other body's working on our justice reinvestment effort, it seems to me that potentially adding pieces to the justice reinvestment to try to, again, the non-detention, I don't want to, that Judge Gerson spoke to, questioning if we're not putting bail conditions on people now, why should we when it ends? But releasing that group, I mean, to be down to 1,406, even if we were down to 1,500, that's down what you just said, 250 people over what it was back last August.
Yeah.
That's close to being enough to at least remove a huge chunk out of Mississippi, if not end it. So, you know, that's the good news. But if we can figure out what we've done and ways to continue to move in that direction by knowing who's been released, what happened to them, and so forth. Senator White, you had a question or comment?
I was just going to say that Judge Grusin brought it up and Ellen did also, but Susanna Davis has been joining us and from the administration and all the GovOps committee meetings. And one of the things she is constantly saying is when we're making decisions now about the way we operate, and this is beyond just corrections and our justice system, but in everything, we should be looking at what it is we were doing before that isn't necessary now or could be changed permanently. And I just think that we need to constantly be keeping that in our heads, that not just on this area, but on all the areas. Why can we make these changes now? And should they be made, some of them be made permanent? And should we really be looking at how we can change our way of operating? So that I just wanted to reinforce that.
Yeah, that. Other comments? Well, I'm glad the Justice Center is looking at that. I was wondering if this was if we should take this as an opportunity, but I also think we should. It's really not part of our justice reinvestment study, the detention population, but it'd be interesting to keep track of that and how this is, why we've been able to lower that. I was thinking about some people where I've heard of certain events occurring where I know in the normal times they would have been incarcerated on bail conditions, and they're not. They're being cited into court. So. Other comments, questions? If we were to meet next week, if we need to, what would be a good day for everybody?
Wednesday's a good day for me.
Let's just stick with a Wednesday plan. Can we do plan this same hour, 10 to 12:15, and Peggy will work with me on an agenda, and if you have items, I think we should probably continue to get updates on the population trends and other things, and with the same basic group. Joe?
Dick, I don't know whether I'll be able to join you or not. I'm having a CAT scan tomorrow and next week supposedly surgery somewhere, but schedule it and I'll see what I can do.
Okay, well, thank you. Good luck with that. My God.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
Oh, Dick, just one thing.
Yes, Alice.
Next week, could we hear what services are still open and working with regard to the people getting out in terms of assisting them so they don't wind up coming back in?
Good question. Any thoughts on who we would hear from for that?
I don't know.
Diversion?
Coalition for Homelessness, maybe?
I don't know. Diversion, certainly. I wonder about mental health designated agencies.
Yeah, and I think diversion is a good one. Who else are they usually assigned to? I mean, people like some of the local community groups that help. I don't know who they are.
Community justice centers.
Community justice centers.
Yeah, you may want to
Also,
get
COSA.
Yeah, COSA.
Yeah, I was gonna say Dale Crook would probably be a good person to reach out.
Oh, okay. Oh, Dale Crook, okay.
And Derek Miodovnik from DSC also heads up a lot of their
Yeah. Okay, good
service
idea.
branch.
Did you get all those names, Peggy?
Yep. What was, David, what was the last one? Derek who?
Miodovnik, I'll email you. It's
yeah, please do.
I think I know who that is, but that would be great. Yep. And Dale's probably a good person to check in with.
He could at least point you in the right direction because they do the
Okay.
COSA through the corrections.
Ellen, would you be able to give us an outlook from the Justice Center?
Yeah, absolutely. I was also going to say, if you contact Dale, he might be in a good position. I think Dale would be the best person to speak to what's happening at the supervision level. So how supervision officers are able or not able to be interacting with folks and kind of what they're doing differently. And I think Dale is the right person to ask sort of how DOC has been adapting case planning and connections to services and any number of things, knowing that programs probably aren't meeting, right? Because they can't congregate groups of people anymore, and
Right.
they're going to be all kinds of changes in that.
Well, maybe we could also talk to the recovery community. Somebody from what's his name? Used to be a representative. Peter Mallory. Peter Mallory. Right? Isn't he head of? Who were you thinking of, Alice?
I was thinking you might be thinking of Will Hunter, but no.
No, Peter Mallory, I think, is with, what's the group he's with?
Judge Grierson, we can't hear you.
I don't know what group he's with, but he's still involved in the recovery community, and I
Right.
think he's local. So
Yeah.
you'd be available.
All right, well, those are some great suggestions. Everybody stay safe out there. If you go out there, hopefully those of you with the gray hair like myself are taking advantage of the senior shopping hour.
The senior shopping hours are busier than around 6 o'clock at night or 7
Well,
o'clock.
I don't know about that. I was there this morning at 6:30 at the Price Chopper in Bennington, and
Was it
it
busy?
wasn't that crowded. No, it wasn't that crowded. but it was
Oh, our
disappointing
seniors
that I couldn't get my bagels because the bagels were all gone.
Our seniors are in there pushing away.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, they have all these places where you stand, you know, you can't be more than 6 feet. That's 2 cart lengths.
Oh. Okay. Good
Are you
enough.
down
Thank
to
you all.
Are you down to one-way aisles? Because they've.
Yeah.
No,
started that here.
no, no,
Yes,
we
and
still get lost.
It works. It's nice. You just follow the arrows.
Yeah, we
I-
should do that.
I had one complaint that the person in front of them was moving too slow, and they wanted to know if it was illegal to overtake them in the aisle.
I don't know. We have room in the jails now for people that are too slow to get out of the way, right?
Which surge facility would that be?
I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you all very much. And
Thank you.
I just wanted to say a word for everybody that, you know, really seriously stay healthy out there. This thing is pretty scary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all
It
very
is.
much.
Thank
Have a
you.
good one.